That old tattoo didn't seem like anything special. A group seated at the central table of the restaurant chuckled softly, glancing toward the elderly man sitting alone in the corner. The old man was thin, with snow-white hair, wearing a worn-out jacket, his left arm revealing a faded tattoo. He said nothing, only holding his glass of water. But minutes later, a young Navy SEAL entered, and when his eyes landed on that tattoo, the entire room fell silent. Suddenly, would you stand up, or would you turn away like everyone else? On Sunday morning, the New Holland Central restaurant was bustling with people. It was Veterans Discount Day. In a corner table, an elderly man, about 80 years old, thin, with a metal prosthetic leg, sat quietly with a small tray of food and a glass of water. His name was Robert Tellis, once a logistics technician in the SEALs in 1969. He wore no uniform or insignia, just a faded brown jacket and an old tattoo on his left wrist, a dagger crossed over an anchor. 4 middle-aged men at a nearby table glanced at him while eating. "I bet he drew that tattoo himself. It looks ancient." "What kind of soldier doesn't have a veteran's card?" one said. A waitress approached, tilting her head gently. "I'm sorry, someone complained that you're making others uncomfortable. Could you sit in the outdoor area, sir?" Robert remained silent, nodding slightly. He picked up his tray and stood, struggling toward the door, his right hand holding the tray, his left gripping his cane, limping as he walked. A child in line asked his father, "Dad, why does that man walk so funny? And walk so?" The father pulled his son close, whispering, "He's just a homeless man. Don't pay attention to him." As Mr. Tellis passed the group of men, one spoke deliberately loud enough, "If he's really a SEAL, then I must be a general." The whole table burst into laughter. Robert didn't react. Only a tear fell from his chin to the tiled floor. No one stopped him. No one asked. The manager watched from behind the counter, hesitating, but then turned to help another customer. Robert's shoulders slumped slightly as he pushed the door open with his shoulder, struggling to balance his tray, cane, and dignity all at once. The sunlight outside was harsh, making him squint as he looked for an empty table in the nearly deserted outdoor seating area, despite the pleasant weather. Perhaps that's why they wanted him there, out of sight, where his presence wouldn't bother other customers. Each step was a small battle. The prosthetic leg that had served him for decades creaked slightly, needing maintenance he couldn't afford. His pension barely covered rent and medication. A waitress watched through the window, her young face concerned. She'd only been working at the restaurant for 2 weeks, but something about the way the old man carried himself, despite the humiliation, moved her. There was dignity there, buried under years of neglect and disdain. Robert found a small table near the edge of the patio, carefully setting down his tray before sitting in the metal chair. The food was already cooling. Eggs and toast, a simple Veterans Day special he'd saved up to enjoy. He looked back through the window at the lively restaurant inside. People laughed and talked, sharing stories and meals. Out here, it was just him and the occasional passing car. This wasn't new to him. This separation, this invisible wall between him and others who couldn't see past his appearance. I apologize for getting emotional as I write this. A man who once protected our freedom now faces such injustice. Robert Tellis had served as military personnel in the SEALs Bravo team, responsible for technical support and supplies during missions deep in hostile territory. He lost a leg during a logistics coordination mission when he stepped on a landmine near the Laos border in 1971. The day he returned home, there was no welcome ceremony or public medals. Many of his missions remain classified as top secret. He lived quietly, opening a small auto repair shop in Colorado, living off the work of his remaining hands for 30 years. He constantly helped young people, teaching them trades, fixing cars for free for poor neighbors, but never speaking of his military past. He only carried his small tattoo and a yellowed letter, a handwritten note from his former commander that read, "Thank you to the quietest soldier I've ever commanded." Every year, he visited a different restaurant to eat on Veterans Day. Not for the discount, but to honor the memory of a friend who fell with him during that landmine explosion. Yet, every year, he was misunderstood, shooed away like an old beggar. Robert never complained, never corrected anyone. The soft-spoken mechanic simply moved on, carrying the weight of memories few would ever understand. His neighbors only knew him as kind-hearted old Rob, the man who fixed their kids' bikes for free and never failed to say good morning. What they didn't know was that the limp in his step came from saving 3 men during a botched extraction, or that the scars on his hands were from pulling wounded soldiers from burning vehicles. The restaurant he chose today was special. It was where his fallen friend had promised they'd eat when they got home, a promise made the night before their last mission together in 1971. Robert and his team had been tasked with establishing a supply route for field operatives in deep, hostile territory. The mission was classified, but essential, providing medical supplies and ammunition to forward teams. James Harrington, Robert's closest friend in the unit, had carried a photo of this very restaurant in his pocket. "The best burgers in New Holland," he'd said. "When we get home, I'm buying the first round." They were just 8 miles from extraction when they hit the minefield. Robert was navigating using hand-drawn maps and his exceptional memory for terrain. James was on point. The explosion threw Robert 30 feet. When he regained consciousness, the medic was already working on what remained of his leg. Through the haze of pain, he saw them zip up the body bag over James's face. 4 other men were injured that day, but all made it home alive because Robert, despite his injury, remembered the extraction coordinates and guided the medevac helicopter to their location through heavy radio interference. His technical skills, those some dismissed as not real combat, saved 5 lives that day. But he couldn't save James. So every year, on the anniversary, Robert found a restaurant. Sometimes he could afford a burger, sometimes just a coffee. But he sat, remembered, and honored a promise only he was left to keep. The tattoo, the dagger piercing an anchor, wasn't the standard SEAL insignia. It was something their small unit had designed, a personal emblem only the 8 of them bore. Now, as far as Robert knew, he might be the last one alive carrying it. As Robert reached the threshold, the back door opened. A young soldier in black civilian clothes entered, with a high and tight military haircut and a purposeful stride. His name was Jackson Miles, 27, currently a combat SEAL, home on leave for a few weeks. Jackson noticed the old man limping, the distinctive tattoo clearly visible on his left wrist. He froze, eyes wide. "Excuse me, sir. Were you with SEAL Bravo team?" Robert flinched slightly, looking up. "A long time ago, but yes, I was part of it." Jackson stood at attention, snapping a proper military salute in the middle of the bustling restaurant. "Sir, you're the one they talk about in training. LSG-7, right?" Mr. Tellis was too overwhelmed to speak. Jackson turned to the service. "Counter. This restaurant has no right to ask him to leave. If anyone feels uncomfortable in the presence of a living legend, maybe they should step outside for some air." The group at the nearby table flushed with shame. One stood quickly and left. An elderly woman nearby stood slowly, clapping. Then an entire row of other customers stood as well. Robert said nothing, but gently squeezed Jackson's hand. "Thank you, son. One person recognizing me is enough." Jackson wasn't done. He walked to the center of the restaurant and spoke clearly. "This man before you coordinated the extraction of 17 wounded soldiers during Operation Swift Current. The tattoo he bears was earned in blood, not bought in a shop. I'm here today because men like him set the standards we now follow." The restaurant fell completely silent. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Forks stopped mid-bite. All eyes were on the young SEAL and the old man by the door. "In training," Jackson continued, "they teach us about the shadow teams, the men who made impossible missions possible. Robert Tellis designed extraction protocols we still use. Today, his supply route planning saved more lives than most frontline medics." The manager approached, visibly shaken. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. Your meal today is on the house, and we'd be honored if you'd accept our invitation to return whenever you wish." Robert smiled faintly and shook his head. "I don't need special treatment. I just came to remember a friend." Jackson asked quietly, "May I join you, sir? It'd be an honor to hear about your friend." Robert nodded, and they moved to a quiet corner table. Not the outdoor seats, but the best table in the house. Across the room, the four men who'd laughed earlier watched in silence. One by one, they stood and left the restaurant quietly, leaving their meals half finished. The waitress who'd watched through the window approached their table with fresh coffee. "I'm so sorry about earlier," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "My grandfather was in Vietnam too. He never talked about it." Robert looked at her, seeing something familiar in her eyes. "What was his name?" he asked gently. "James Harrington," she replied. "I never met him. He died before I was born." Robert's hand shook as he reached for his wallet, pulling out a worn photograph. "Your grandfather?" he said softly. "Promised to buy me a burger here someday." A week later, the local newspaper ran a small article. "The Old Soldier and the Salute That Silenced a Restaurant." The photo capturing Jackson's salute to Mr. Tellis went viral on social media, garnering millions of shares. The community began visiting the restaurant to ask about Mr. Tellis, many surprised to learn he lived just 3 blocks away. A group of schoolchildren sent handwritten letters to his home, saying they wanted to hear him tell stories about those who sacrificed. Jackson returned to his base, but sent a handwritten letter to Robert every month. The following spring, the town held a ceremony honoring 12 silent veterans, with Robert invited as the first to speak. He only said, "I don't represent anyone. I'm just someone who tried to do the right thing and lived quietly." The audience included Jackson, standing in the middle row, hand silently over his heart. What began as a simple moment of recognition transformed the town. Robert's workshop became a gathering place where veterans could find not just free repairs, but unspoken understanding. When local schools needed a speaker for Memorial Day, Robert arrived quietly, never speaking of himself, but of the meaning of service and the importance of remembering those who never returned. The tattoo that once sparked mockery became a recognized symbol throughout the community, replicated on a small plaque outside City Hall with the words, "Honor the Silent." Jackson's naval career flourished, but he never forgot his connection with Robert. During training sessions with new recruits, he shared the story of the old logistics officer who created supply routes that saved countless lives. On Robert's 80th birthday, a surprise awaited at his door. Jackson, now an instructor, stood with 7 young SEALs who'd traveled to meet the man behind the stories they'd heard. Most surprising of all was Sarah Harrington, the waitress from that day, who'd brought her family to meet the man who served alongside her grandfather. "He would have been proud to know his granddaughter met you," she told Robert, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. The town renamed the street where Robert's workshop stood Silent Service Way, not just for him, but for all those whose contributions happened behind the scenes, out of the spotlight. When Robert passed away 3 years later, his funeral was attended by hundreds, many wearing small pins depicting a dagger piercing an anchor. His coffin was carried by Jackson and 5 other active duty SEALs, with full military honors long denied him. The old prosthetic leg that had carried him through decades of silent service was replaced in his coffin with a new one, provided by a veterans organization inspired by his story to improve healthcare for aging veterans. On his headstone, beneath his name and dates, were simple words that summed up a lifetime. His silence spoke volumes. His service changed lives. If this moment stopped your heart, perhaps it's time we stop forgetting those who gave everything. In silence. Subscribe to TT Soul Stories for more veteran stories and heartwarming tales that still resonate in our hearts.